10% goes towards building capital, and 90% goes towards building revenue. Which means when the government spends 100 rupees, only 12% of that goes towards building capital. And this capital could be in different forms. It could be in the form of building your roads, building your hospitals, building your infrastructure. Now, if you notice this itself has a very, very important feature. You will notice that most of your government is not going towards improving your health. Okay, though you want it to do, but most of it is going towards non-plan. And non-plan, the largest portion of it is in what? So if you have the government to spend, what is the largest government spend in? Any idea? Where does government spend the largest amount of money?
Social. Defense.
No, definitely not social. Definitely not defense. Definitely not salaries. The largest spending of the government today is in interest costs. For 60 years, the government has been only increasing its debt. It has to pay interest on that debt. 28% of your government's money. So out of 100 rupees, 28 rupees goes towards interest costs. Please remember, this expenditure is not covered by revenue, which means to spend this, the government has to borrow even more. Okay, so your total expenditure is how much did I tell you? 18 lakh crores. Out of which the government borrows 6 lakh crores. Correct? So 1/3 of the expenditure is actually funded by borrowing. Okay, so imagine you had an income of 15 lakh crores. In fact, ours is less. It's 13 lakh crores. You have an expenditure of 18 lakh crores. So you actually have a shortfall of approximately 6 lakh crores. Now, what do you do with 6 lakh crores? You borrow. You borrow from somebody else. Who does the government borrow from in our case? Borrows from you and me. Borrows from the bank. Okay, so you borrow 6 lakh crores, and where do you spend the 6 lakh crores? You spend the 6 lakh crores to pay the interest. The interest cost of your government today is 6 lakh crores. So technically, if we don't manage our things well, we will borrow only to pay interest. Very, very interesting insight. And this is how our non-planned expenditure has been growing in the last few years. Okay, as you can see, the blue line is the good line. Hopefully it's a good line. But if you go back, you'll see that too is not a very good line, because out of that, 20% only goes towards building capital. 80% goes towards what? Expenditure on salaries, pensions, etc. Okay. So only 12% of your total expenditure. It is like saying, I earn 12 lakh crores, okay, 13 lakh crores, I borrow 6 lakh crores, or I borrow 5 lakh crores, and out of this, 12% or 10%, which is 2 lakh crores, is what I spend towards my EMI. Everything else, I spend towards enjoying myself. Okay, that's a very far-fetched attitude, but that's true. Okay. This is how your interest repayments look. This is how your interest costs have gone over the last few years. In fact, you will see in 2014 it has just ballooned. The orange line is actually repayment, which means if you borrow, the government borrows for 10 years, which means it also has to repay. So when I say that only 5 lakh crores goes towards paying your interest, there is also 20% which you add on to that, is about 1.5 lakh crores, which goes towards paying your repayment, okay, to refinance your old expenditure. Okay. The second biggest expenditure is subsidies. Okay, subsidies account for approximately 20-25% of our income, and 90% of the subsidies are three things. 90% of subsidy are three things: food, fuel, and fertilizer. Okay. As you can see, we've transitioned from bringing food subsidy, which was very high, to a little lower. If the last government hasn't had its way, the food subsidy bill would have gone up even further down. The food subsidy accounts for about 1/3 of the total expenditure. The fuel subsidy, which is something the government has been targeting for the last few years has started reducing. One of the reasons it started reducing is because it has allowed petrol and diesel to be freely priced, or they've increased the price of petrol. And fertilizers, which is again a subsidy based on urea, also has been increasing. So what you will see is that these three account for a major proportion of your subsidies. Who does this benefit? The fruit subsidy benefits the lower portion of our society. The fuel subsidy benefits you and me most. And the fertilizer subsidy benefits the farmers. Please understand, you are subsidizing fertilizer to a portion of the economy which generates the lowest income for us. So agriculture income has gone down, but that's the subsidy. So if we are able to manage our subsidy burden, which is 23% of your total income, you will drastically reduce your fiscal deficit. It needs political will here. The political will is not about disinvestment, it is not about interest cost, because interest cost, once built into the system, is already fixed. The only place you can actually have maneuverability is on the subsidy burden. So looking forward, this is the first budget of our finance minister. If the finance minister takes tough calls, this is where it has to happen. Okay? How does the government fund this fiscal deficit? Where do you think so he borrows the money from? Who does he borrow from? Huh? From us. Why does he borrow from us? He borrows from us because we think that the best place to put our money is with the government. Why is the government the best place to put our money? Safe, completely safe. Which is true. The government will never default. Why will it not default? Because if it needs more money, it just prints it. Correct. Which is reality. So it just prints it. But how many of you all have seen the currency note you'll have in your pocket? What does the currency note says in your pocket? I promise to pay the bearer a sum of rupees 100. So technically, that's just a promise, isn't it? So imagine you took this currency note. So it's a debt. It's a debt of the government, which means the government has given an IOU saying that जब भी तुमको पैसा लगेगा, please come to me, I will give you 100 rupees. So imagine you took this 100 rupee note and went to the government and you said, please give me 100 rupees. What will the government give you? So who's issued these notes? Reserve Bank of India. Signed there by the government of India. So you go to Reserve Bank and say, give me 100 rupees. What will the government give you? So what the government will give you is 100 1 rupee coin. Okay. Now, so I'm going to end this with understanding this. Okay, how it affects us. Why the fiscal deficit affects us? Why is he talk for half an hour and how does it affect us? So he gives you 100 1 rupee coins. Correct? What has happened to our 1 rupee coins in the last 60 years? Okay. So 100 years ago, our 1 rupee coin, minted in 1939, was a coin made of silver. Okay, it was 11.83 grams, 22 carat, which means 10 grams of silver. Today, what is that value of that coin? It's approximately 500 rupees. Approximately 500. Okay, that same silver. What is the value of that 1 rupee coin you have in your pocket? 1 rupee. Over the last 100 years, your 1 rupee has gone down by 450 times. If you do the calculation, bad fiscal management ensure that your 1 rupee coin keeps getting smaller and smaller and thinner and thinner. It impacts you because the smaller coin you have, the higher inflation you have. It's true. The smaller coin you have, when you travel abroad, the lesser dollars you get. Okay? Your fiscal deficit is an important aspect of this. At 7% inflation, 7.5% inflation year on year for the last so many years, every time you give a 5 rupee coin to the government, and 6 years later the government gives you, or 8 years later the government gives you 10 rupees back, what is he basically doing? He's taking that 5 rupees coin, melting it, dividing it into two, and giving it to you back. Into 5 rupees coins. That's the reality of a 5 rupee coin. Okay? It's very important that you understand this. What the government does every budget, it gives you a lot of sobs. It makes you look at indirect in a very different way. But if you don't understand how it works with you, why inflation? Why is the government going through things? It's going to be very tough to do. Okay? I look forward to you all reading the budget again with a different insight today now. Okay? And I'll end here. Thank you for.
Insight into the budget. I would now like to welcome Dr. Prasarak to conduct the panel discussion.
Normally in the class when you say, are there any questions before the class is to end, there are no questions so that the class can end. But here what I'm going to do is, if you don't ask questions, I'll raise the questions. So we'll have a discussion for about 25 minutes, maybe half an hour at the most. So let's start. I would like to invest about 5 minutes in the professors sitting in the front row, what their views are on the budget. Doctor, face the problem. Just brief view on the budget.
Anyway, it's an interim budget, and our finance minister did not have much scope to do anything. So he said actually over the period I will keep on changing, keep on improving the budget. And since it was already done by the earlier finance minister Chidambaram, so I think today looking at the budget, whatever changes have been made for the individuals, they are actually most welcome. Whatever has been done for the corporate, they are also welcome. Overall actually budget, it's very difficult to judge because I am not a man of finance. Okay, and I think Arun Jaitley said, I think it is not within my scope of work also. So let's see, I think whatever will happen within next 8 to 10 months, and really I think we should look at the budget which will come for the 15-16. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Joshi, what's your perspective, any thought? Dr. Banerjee. To those who do not know, he has just joined us. Please give him a big hand. As an associate professor in the area of marketing, Dr. Banerjee.
Well, my opinion, this has been quite a balanced budget. What the panelists have already discussed about the increase in FDI in defense and also into insurance. I'm sure this is going to attract an investment of approximately $4 billion this financial year. Unfortunately, there's been a lot of, I would say, like laggard in implementation of FDI in multi-brand retail. And recently, I was reading a news article that Carrefour from France has also withdrawn from India, and it's only Walmart which is, just doing business in India or into wholesale category. In defense also, the corporate houses, big corporate houses like L&T, like Tata's, they have shown a great amount of resistance for allowing 49% investment into defense sector also. From a personal point of view, income tax, the increase in limit from 1 to 1.5 lakhs, I think that it's too little too late. And this, the way inflation is rising, the way education cost, healthcare costs, everything is rising. I think that it should be to an extent of minimum 2.5 lakhs. This is my personal perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Populist budget, other than he's attempted to do practically most of the things which were expected and not expected both. But ideally, if you ask me, we will have to wait for that 15-16 part, the next month of March, when he comes out with another budget, and that is going to throw more light on what he presented this time. Rather than getting into the details, it is better to actually watch rather than commit anything today.
Yeah. Viewpoint, it's also fine. Dr. Dopeshwarkar, Professor of Economics, your view on the budget, please come. तुमचा अभिप्राय सांगावा. Please give the mic there.
I haven't gone into the great details of the budget, but my first impression is that this budget is almost a continuation of UPA policies, but then he has made a mention that he would indicate the direction in which the future NDA budgets will be there. And to that extent, I think he has made an effort, but perhaps the time he was allowed was too short. And therefore, giving, you can say, a little long rope to NDA finance minister, I would say that this budget is okay, it's a step towards what rapid economic growth he indicated he would try to achieve in future. And I think overall he has managed to sort of try to give satisfaction to almost all the sectors without trying to pinch any particular sector too much. So far as taxation is concerned, okay, he hasn't much changed the tax policies, slight amendments here and there, but I think overall it will not make a big impact to the tax revenue as such. Expenditure policies almost they are continued, as our friend Mr. Norona explained, that the expenditure always exceeds income and we are living on borrowings. As he has indicated that he would try to reduce the deficit, budget deficit or fiscal deficit from 4.1% even to around 3% in coming budgets. Let us wait and see. That is what I think. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. For the House. From time to time, we have heard speakers say about deficit financing. The question is open, anybody can take the question. In fact, recently there was an article by an eminent expert, and this is true also, that deficit financing per se is not bad. In fact, deficit financing is used as a strategy to utilize resources in order to fund the initial shortage that we have in the economic system, so that it can stimulate the economy, it can generate effective demand for consumption, it can also generate effective demand for investment, and barring some time lag, short run, we can see in the long run asset formation and rapid economic development. Many countries have had the benefits of deficit financing as an instrument for economic development. In the meantime, we face inflation. So second proposition is inflation per se is not bad. Small doses of inflation in fact is desirable because there is a hidden tax in that. And inflation and economic development are also closely related. I would like to raise these two propositions for the House and for the learned speakers if they can respond. Just to condemn deficit financing ab initio is not correct. Just to condemn inflation ab initio again is not correct. Extremes of anything is an unmitigated nuisance. That's no, it's a truism. There is no doubt about it. So can the House take this? I would like to start with Dr. Dopeshwarkar. He has taught this for several years.
Yes.
If you can come here and enlighten us for a few minutes. And then the House can take this. Not prepared, extempore.
Deficit financing and inflation, they are, as I said, these are topics for debate in economics. I will just explain what I have read and what I feel about deficit financing and inflation. Just as the democratic governments started submitting their budgets to the parliament, first in the British Parliament, later on in other European and American countries. Earlier, it was thought that budget should be balanced. Just as it is to a common man, the same applies to the government, that one must live within his income. To exceed income is bad, to borrow is not very good, and therefore budget should be balanced. That was the earlier fiscal policy. The government also should have a balanced budget. And then it was thought that if the government borrows, the repayment has to be done, and that for making repayments, government will have to tax people. So it will be therefore a taxation on people, and therefore the budget should be balanced. Any imbalance or any excess of expenditure over income is bad. And the same policies continued as sound finance for a long time, and then in 1930, 1929, there was Great Depression. All countries in Europe, they followed the same sound finance policies, income and expenditure equalities, and then there was large amount of unemployment, more than 10%, 15% unemployment. And remember, all of these were developed countries with very high per capita incomes. Nobody was able to suggest any policy to remove that economic depression of 1929, which is supposed to be the Great Depression, and very large scale unemployment. And then Keynes came forward and he said that removing unemployment is the first job of the government. And for that purpose, even unbalanced budget is welcome. He said, let government borrow, let government create money and use that money for creating employment. And to the extreme he suggested, let people dig holes and fill them up again, give them jobs, give them income. Of course, he said that any civilized society will not do this sort of thing, but the fact is government can use deficits for creating full employment situation. And after Keynes, the same deficit as was suggested by Dr. V.N.Bedekar, that it could be used as an instrument of economic development. That deficit, if it is used for creating capital assets, productive assets, if production can be increased, if that deficit can help us to increase our GDP at a faster rate, then automatically when GDP increases faster, the deficit as a proportion to GDP will go down, and therefore there will not be such necessity. And therefore I feel that deficit, if it is properly used for creating productive assets, for increasing GDP at a faster rate, deficit should be welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
Secondly, on inflation, I would say creeping inflation, very moderate rate, 3 to 5%, is supposed to be a welcome thing because that encourages production. Remember, we are living in a society where production is carried on, and that same production gets distributed among all the people of different types of goods and services. There are necessities, there are comforts, there are luxuries, there are agricultural commodities, industrial commodities and services. They all together make, their valuation makes GDP. That is our productive capacity. And then when it is distributed, it is distributed in the form of income. And that income is again spent on goods and services. That makes our standard of living. And for that, if we want to increase our standard of living year after year, we must increase our production of goods and services. And to encourage that production of goods and services, a moderate rate of inflation less than 5% is supposed to be welcome. Only problem is, once the inflation starts, it is very difficult to stop it exactly at 3%. Why this happens is, by the time government comes to know that the inflation rate is just crossing 5% limit, it has already crossed. Because data collection it is all time consuming, and therefore fine tuning it becomes very, very difficult. And therefore, though moderate inflation is welcome, any rate of inflation beyond 5%, my teacher Dr. Brahmanand used to say that inflation is something which once it is beyond 6%, 8%, it automatically becomes double-digit inflation. And once it is double-digit, it can also jump to higher values, and higher inflation rates are very bad. I would just tell a very small story. In Germany, there was hyperinflation. Hyperinflation is a rate of inflation more than 1000% per year, and so very high rates. It so happened that one fellow thought that he should withdraw all his money from his bank, because once inflation begins, the value of your money becomes less and less. With all that money, you can buy less and less. So, in a winter morning, he went to his bank very early. It was still darker in Germany in those days, and he withdrew all the cash and put it in his bag, and he started going back to his home. But then he was attacked by somebody, and then he fell unconscious. By the time he regained his consciousness, he found all the cash was lying, only the bag was stolen. So that is how you look at inflation. Very slow rate of inflation is really welcome, but then it becomes difficult, and therefore you see what is happening in India is controlling inflation is a job left to RBI, because RBI controls supply of money. But actually you will find who is creating inflation. It is the act of government. Our government of India's actions are mainly responsible for inflation in India. So long as the responsibility of controlling inflation is also undertaken by the government, because you cannot hold only RBI responsible for inflation.
Yeah.
So therefore, this sort of a thing exists in India, and I would say it indicates sort of underdevelopment. In a developed country, they know their rights and they also know their responsibilities.
Yeah. Can we proceed
So
further?
this is not happening. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much for your inflation. Time permitting, I'll come back to that. Dr. Vishnu Pranay, as a chartered accountant, what do you think about it? Very briefly, so that others can also.
Primarily, as Dr. Murthy earlier pointed out, yes, inflation, moderate inflation will be a good thing, and deficit financing, again, as Mr. Narana also pointed out, if it is for utilizing it for the right things, that is, the deficit is for capital expenditure or enhanced capital expenditure, it is also actually going to result in future productivity or profitability. So if we look upon the budget as an exercise in a cash flow, yes, you can augment your cash flows with borrowings or let inflation take care of the gap by printing currency notes. I have three issues which really create the problem, so to say, or because of which the deficit financing or the inflation may not necessarily work. So I just mark those three issues and then probably let the panelists look at them. See, the first issue is, you must have heard that word often on television, even in the newspapers, supply side constraints. So what exactly are these supply side constraints? Primarily, if there is more money, what is inflation, or what happens when the government prints currency notes? There is more money, or when they put out those schemes like Keynes had suggested, or when they give subsidies, there is more money in the hands of the people. So you just print notes and distribute them, that also is a way of generating income in the hands of the people. The point is, what happens or how do they use the money? They use the money to go across and chase things. Oh, I have more money now, let me buy this product, let me do this. So there is too much money chasing too few goods. Is that the situation? Which means the supply is not picking up. So why does it not pick up? That is my first kind of question as an answer to a question. The second issue is leakages in government expenditure. When I say I'm giving a subsidy or I'm spending 36,000 crores or rather 30,700, I don't remember the exact figure, on infrastructure, that is roads. How much is actually, what is the value which we are going to get in the form of roads? Whether the roads will be at least worth 10,000 crores or whether they are just going to be roads on the plan and well, that money will be elsewhere. So if the roads are not there, they are not going to give a benefit. The third thing is, what is the untalked devil? This time corruption and black money are completely not covered in the budget, although doesn't mean that they have gone away, although one hopes that they will. So the point is the black money. So these are three issues which I want to flag. And probably with the existence of these issues, that is what is making the inflation and the deficit financing a monster. It's like saying a little bit of fever is good, it makes you active. But if you have been running a fever for the last 60 years, and that also at 104 degrees, then maybe increasing the temperature is not a good idea.
Okay, I'll give a small
Very
insight.
briefly?
Yeah, very briefly. There's Schumpeter model and there's a Keynes model. And the Keynes model, I have a belief in the Keynes model. Keynes model said that if you build in deficit, ensure that you close the deficit after a period of time. Okay, and the only way to close the deficit is to build better economics, which means increase GDP. On the first aspect of where the money is going, what has happened from 1930s till today, and this is not in India. If you think this is only an Indian phenomenon, it is not in India, it's world over. So Spain, for example, has unemployment in youth of upwards of 30%, okay, and has an unemployment rate of 15% or thereabout. What is happening? Why is this fiscal deficit and inflation become such an important portion? Is because unlike the 1930s and 1940s, the Rooseveltian era, governments today do not believe in building infrastructure. They believe in being populist. And to be populist, you say that, see, I'm giving you cash in your hand and go out and spend it. And why that works today is because unlike before, our leaders today depend a lot on public perception. And public perception primarily is what gets them voted in. So if I tell somebody that we will not have inflation, and you get the problem which comes with not having inflation is that every year your salary doesn't increase. So if you have deflation, your salary won't increase every year. Would you feel better that today if you are earning ₹1,00,000, next year you earn the same ₹1,00,000? No. The expectation is I should increase salary every year. So little inflation is good. But when the government comes and says you get ₹1,00,000 and I'm giving you ₹1,00,000 somewhere else. So in 2008, what the government basically did and why the inflation went from 3.8% to 6% is the government said, okay, you got farm loans, we'll waive that off. So all the central governments had all the central government employees suddenly had wage hikes. All the people were given better tax benefits, so you could spend. So what happens? You get all the cash in your hand. So government is infusing cash in your hand, and you feel better. So you go out and vote for that government in again, saying that you've done a great job. You put money in my hand. Let me vote for you again. But somebody has to pay for this, correct? And the way they pay for it is they pay for it with higher borrowing, and that creates that complication. What do the people do with it when it's in their hand? So what did Indians do with it? Indians went out and bought gold, correct? And that created another problem. Gold is a non-performing asset, but it keeps you inflation free, correct? Because gold prices rise with inflation, but it's a non-performing asset, it doesn't generate income. Okay, and we are the largest consumer of gold in the world. Okay, so these sometimes the problem and the solution are so interlinked that trying to solve inflation doesn't create happiness in people, but trying to increase inflation creates happiness but has a long-term effect. So unfortunately, I am not a great economist, but I think so that's the space.
Dr. Oak, how do you respond?
two important things when we talk about deficit financing and inflation. We need to identify first thing, when you are talking about deficit financing and inflation and current macroeconomic situation, we have to understand a continued slowdown in the emerging economies has also a lot of role to play. We are just talking about Indian economy or Indian INC. But when you are talking about the emerging economy and the slowdown in emerging economy, so in that case, not only deficit financing and inflation, but the current account deficit also has to be taken into account. Because from 4.7% to undoubtedly 1.7% which is coming down, that has a lot of role to play. Because standalone we talk about a budget, it is as good as like expectation from Mr. Jaitley about a budget and coming out with some reforms. It is as good as with Murthy sir, Kadare sir and Winston sitting and people expecting from me also their kind of aura. So anyway, whatever I speak, it is going to be more popular than what you three speak. And the same thing is happening from Mr. Jaitley speaking. Because whatever steps he has taken,
that doesn't absolve you of may I be excused for interjecting? That doesn't excuse you from the role of a technocrat. That's why I said Director Brims and Professor of Finance.
Sir, rightly said, only deficit financing and inflation, it has to be seen as Mr. Rightly had said. For example, he showed a slide of 10% contribution in terms of government borrowing. And I'll just like to make a remark, sir, here. 2 years ago, in fact, Mr. No, I was in HDFC Mutual Fund. The Pune Commissioner had made a statement saying that I am thankful to the small saving agents to mobilize such a huge amount of money that we could pay off the primary teachers their salary. And that's a statement coming in one of the newspapers, whereby people, government borrowing and making payment in the form of salary. So whereas rightly said by the minister, how they are going to pay back after 5 years or 10 years. So we need to identify it in a more rather than having a, as rightly said by Lokesh sir, the budget is balancing or a small amount of favor is required. But rather than that, we need to identify actually where the money comes in, where it has been spent. And then I don't mind people printing notes also. And that is what going to be future.
Thank you. I would like, before we wind up, I would like some question coming from the house. I have raised 2 questions, at least 1 question. So is to 1?
I'll ask one question.
Yeah? No? Okay, fine. You can ask. Anybody can ask.
Yeah. Sir, can this budget can be considered as a socialistic budget? Because if you see the total allocations, 8 lakh banks have been directed to give 8 lakh crores to the farmers. In budget allocation, 1 lakh crore for the SCST welfare, 90,000 crores for women welfare, 20,000 crores for children welfare. Where this money goes? And because of this money is not being used properly, as I said, then why it could have been contained actually. Then probably our surplus, the budget would not have been in deficit, it would have been in surplus.
You have to understand, okay, our constitution makes us a socialist democracy, okay, and I'm giving you a perspective of where we come from. So we cannot say that today onward we will stop this, okay. It will create a lot of income. First of all, you have to accept 2 things in India. There's income inequality, which means that if the poorer section do not get what they want, there will be what we call bhagavat. Okay, and that's more difficult to manage than managing a fiscal deficit. That's the reality. Okay, the second thing is the perception of India as a backward economy comes from the fact that we are not able to provide our lowest with the living standards. The second, what you ask secondly is perfectly right. Is 20,000 crore right or is 2,000 crore right? What is the efficiency of cash flow through to the end? That's something unfortunately is very difficult to monitor, and I think so it's a function of what we Indians are. Correct? If we are corrupt, and I'm not saying you or me, it's we, correct? Then you will have leakages. If you look at the Scandinavian countries, and they've always been one of those economies which are looked upon and said, how do they manage surplus every year? It is because the nature of people who stay there to deliver what they commit. Okay, and that's a function.
Yeah.
ask Anand sir one question. See, it's always been talked about tax to GDP ratio must be improved. Sir, can you just enlighten how it can be done? When people keep on talking, and every budget I have seen that the statement coming tax to GDP ratio has to be watched, it should be monitored. Exactly what is the ideal situation?
Am I audible? Then I'll speak straight away. See, when you talk of tax to GDP ratio or how tax collections can be made buoyant, it is kind of a dichotomy because three specific issues come in here. The first issue is about the ability to pay taxes and the nature of the tax structure. Ideally, if I were, imagine a situation, you find today, I'm just giving a completely out of the box example. You have a situation where a lot of government or semi-government activities are now outsourced. For example, if the municipality wants to handle parking or collect toll tax, it doesn't keep its own employees, doesn't do it itself. What it does is, it gives out contracts and says, okay, this particular toll booth, how much will you quote? And whoever gives the maximum quote is awarded that contract. The point here is, there if I say, oh, I am a frequent visitor to Thane from Mumbai, I can get a monthly pass which lets me do so many trips at a song. Even the government owns railways, they price the pass, which is a 3-month pass or an annual pass, at a much lower rate than what it would cost if you were to just physically add on. Look at other services like telephone or whatever else. But in the case of taxation almost always has been progressive. So if you want people to pay tax, really, if you look at it as an economist or as a commercial person, tell the guys, look, you are paying the maximum tax, I'll give you a discount, give me more tax. He's going to double his payment of tax. If you tell him, if your income is more than 1,000 crores, you will have to pay only 20% tax and not 30% tax, or maybe 15% tax. Or you will get a tax holiday if you reach this much tax target. Probably there will be people who will be inspired or generate that kind of income and pay those kind of taxes. But given the fact that there is such a wide dichotomy and you have a lot of commitments to place, and because as he was mentioning, governments today want to look popular, having a rate of tax like this doesn't work. So therefore the first method by which the tax GDP ratio could be improved doesn't work. The second method is enlarging the tax base, which is actually a good thing, because that is what Mahatma Gandhi used to say. You know, when he was working for the freedom struggle, what did he say? I don't want lakhs or crores of rupees from the Birlas or the Bajaj. I want 1 rupee from every individual. Today what has happened, unfortunately, is a lot of thing is being done for the public. But as Dr. Murthy pointed out, how much percent is paying tax? Only 3% of the people pay tax. You can't expect how much will you wring the juice out of that 3%. They are already gone. So if at least you can increase the tax base to, if not 45% like US, at least make it 10%, you will probably not triple, but at least double the tax collection. So widening the tax base is one thing which has to be seriously done. The second part is your having a rational or attractive system of tax. But I won't say attractive system of tax will work in a situation like India, because one of our famous economists, I think, probably had said that if you make the tax 0% also, people will not declare their true income. Because they are not assured, you know, they will think that next year probably the tax rate will go back to 30% or 40%. So these two things are a big stumbling block, but otherwise you have to make efforts in that direction only.
Thank you. I think it's time to wind up. We had no questions from the students.
I had a small question.
Unless some student want to make me correct my statement. Can there be one question from a student? And then it gives an impression. Of course, I am a student of economics, so I raise the question. And our learned panel members have answered the questions. Can the student raise at least one question and a quick answer we can have from somebody? Yeah.
So at individual level, what should be our...
Loudly.
At individual level, what should be our contribution to the balanced budget?
What should be?
Our contribution at individual level.
At individual level?
What should be our contribution to the balanced budget?
Well, I think he said about Scandinavian countries. One reason for the progress of the Scandinavian countries, of course, size is very small. So managing it is very easy. Ours is a continent, subcontinent. Productivity, you have to work very hard and get the maximum return on the amount of time, money and energy you are expending on education. And if there is value added to your personality, then that can be the greatest way of balancing the budget, because then the demographic dividend goes up. The demographic dividend of the youth is the greatest asset for our country, because we have the largest bulk of the youth population of the world in our country. So today the expectation is you should prepare for the future demographic dividend so that our tax GDP ratio can go up and all that payment of interest is not required. You would have repaid the
No, okay, I'll give you an example. We are a very young country. Our average age is about 20. Italy is one of the older countries. Its average age is about 58. Japan is older. Now, what that means is every year, 1 crore individuals come into the workforce. Okay, two things. The government will either provide you with jobs, okay, or you will have to provide jobs yourself. There are very few opportunities for young people like you. You all are lucky. I'm telling you, the people in this room are extremely lucky. You come because of 2-3 things. First, the advantage of education. Second, the advantage to sit in an AC room and listen to something about economics. Most people don't get this chance. And third, that the future for you, when you get out of this room, so some of you may be a little pissed off and may be a little angry, saying that I don't get a placement of 60 lakhs. And some of you may say, I don't get a placement of 10 lakhs, or I don't. But when you get out of this room, you are employable. And anybody who is employable has the ability to earn income. If you are able to earn income and grow your income, it works. Second, deployment of this income. So a lot of you will be consumption oriented, okay, which is good. It increases the GDP. But also realize, do not end up in a trap the Indian economy is in. Invest. Go out and grow your assets. Better in deployment of assets. Instead of buying a mobile phone, I'm going to give you an example. A mobile phone which has a lifetime of 3 years on a tops, which funds not the Indian economy but the Chinese economy. Okay, versus buying assets which are in India, okay, which generate income. I'm saying even buy government assets because it generates 8%, correct? But it's Indian economy that grows your business.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we'll have to wind up just. We had an interesting debate. We heard Dr. Dopeshwarkar telling you about the origins of deficit financing, the Great Depression, and John Maynard Keynes said you can't find jobs, you ask people to dig the holes and fill them up. So that makes out a strong case for deficit financing. The Americans are very scared of a depression because of the historic factor. Germans are very scared of inflation, again because of the historic factors. From time to time we have had combinations of both, and right now we are having a combination of both. Manufacturing activity, for instance, is at nil almost, and we are having what is known as stagflation, a combination of depression and inflation. The question is how we are going to get out of it. We were talking of food subsidies. I told you in my presentation that the richest of the rich of the world live in India, and the poorest of the poor of the world also live in India. Now, if they are at the bottom of the pyramid, not bottom of the pyramid, they are in the bottomless pit of human degradation. Hunger, squalor, disease, all that you want to say. Now, if they have to be uplifted from that level, subsidies are inevitable, whether it's a BJP government or Congress government. Otherwise, there will be what he said. People may revolt. We were lucky that we didn't have that so far. Fine. We are a democratic government and will continue to be that way. So subsidy, some amount of subsidy is inevitable. On inflation, he gave you the example, a very good example of a silver coin many years ago and a coin today. People have to be educated on inflation. and they are also to be educated on the benefits of no increases in pay but a fall in prices. That is much better. I would prefer the salaries which I was getting as a reader or lecturer when I could conveniently come from the other to Churchgate and not really worry how much it cost me. Today, I have to, though I am at the end of my career and I did not really bother, I have to think twice whether I should board a air-conditioned taxi, whether I should have a taxi, whether I should come by an auto. For the simple reason that we do not know what the rate of inflation is going to be and how long I am going to live. Matching this is going to be extremely difficult. So people have to be educated that mere paper increase in salaries has no meaning. The worth of the goods and services must go on. The last point on inflation, I hope all of you understood what Dr. Dr.V.N.Bedekar said from that example. I want to know whether you understood. What is the meaning of that guy took away the bag but not the money?
Value of bag.
What is the meaning?
Value of bag.
The bag was worth more than the money. So there was a similar story about two brothers, and I wind up with that. In France, both of them inherited equal amount of money. One of them invested only in government paper, gilt-edged. Other one had a very luxurious life, invested all his money on liquor, enjoyed life thoroughly. The guy who had invested all his money in government paper, when he went to the bank to liquidate it, he got almost nothing for it because it was worth then useless. People were using notes to light cigarettes or cigars. So the value of money was nothing. The Doshmark was being used to light fires in the house, night fires in the house, or bonfires in the house. As again that the guy who had consumed all his money in liquor and was a wise guy, he had kept all his bottles, empty bottles. After the war, suddenly, because everything was destroyed, he got a massive amount for the empty bottles because there was a demand for empty bottles. So that's how inflation works. It doesn't mean you should invest all your money in liquor. It doesn't mean that. What it means is the value of money, the investment in financial assets, as against investment in something else. So that's the story of inflation, another side of what Dr. Dr.V.N.Bedekar says. At the outset, let me thank the panel members first for coming here, sharing their views, giving us so much time, and also being part of this panel. Thank you, Mr. Narona. Thank you, Dr. Vishnu. Thank you, Dr. O. And thank all of you.